What's going on, y'all? My name is Davin Youngs, and this is the Becoming Sound podcast. And I say this at the top of every episode, but I'm so grateful to be here with you. I got some really, really lovely messages, DMs, text messages, um, after the last episode where we talked about the inevitable relationship between creativity and intuition. And I want to tease an aspect out more of that today. But first, I just want to say it really means a lot to me, first and foremost, that you would listen to this. But second of all, that you would take the time to communicate with me about it. Um, it's my intention as a human being, as an artist, as a creative to be in community. And I look at the podcast and in many ways that we can sort of show up in the world these days. But I look at this as a catalyst for connection and community. So thanks for being a part of that. In light of that, if you have any sort of light bulbs, ahas, questions that come out of this episode or previous episodes, feel free to shoot me a note. And if you have an idea for a topic that you want me to riff on, or something you're curious about in my journey, or whatever, shoot it. There are no bad ideas. Like, send it to me. I'm interested. I want to hear from you. Um, yeah, also, if you're streaming this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, would love to invite you if you feel so compelled to leave a review. And just so you know, if you aren't aware, you can find a video version of this podcast over at my Substack, Becoming Sound, the Becoming Sound Substack, or at my YouTube page. Just look for Davin Youngs on YouTube. It's a video of me talking. But sometimes it's nice to see the face, the human being behind the voice. And so if you're interested, you can find that there. Um, I'm just coming back. Last weekend, I was in Madison, Wisconsin, my very first offering of the Reset, my immersive sound healing experience in 2026. I was privileged enough to bring the Reset to the Capitol Theater in downtown Madison, which, if you're not familiar with, is an iconic and beautiful theater. And a little insider baseball here, that was the very first gig I got booked for me a year ago, actually more than a year ago, with my current booking agency. And so it's crazy. It was crazy. It just felt like a new era, a new experience in bringing what it is that I'm doing to the world. And so I'm really grateful. I also want to just share that, with the Reset, um, I'm dancing on this line that sits at the center of sound healing, wellness, well-being, and performance and entertainment. And um, I'm really targeting a lot of theaters or traditional performing venues for a number of reasons. And I've learned a lot along the way. There are a lot of questions around um, just financial viability, if I'm honest with you, in these kind of performance situations or scenarios. And the Capitol Theater, like I said, it's the most beautiful sort of traditional theater space. And so I wasn't quite certain how this would roll there in terms of ticket sales. The stage is quite small. They could only fit 35 mats on the stage. And so the remainder of the tickets were going to be just traditional seats in a house. And I didn't know how it would roll, but I gotta say, it felt like a success. We sold nearly 400 tickets. The whole orchestra level of the theater was full, and some of the seats in the balcony were full. And I heard reflected back from so many people that it was a really positive experience. And so I'm just looking to continue to experiment and grow and try this on for size. I have so much to learn. Um, if I'm totally honest with you, the last year was really tricky in terms of getting this thing booked. I don't um, have it down pat. There's a learning curve in terms of my ability to offer this thing that's new to these theaters. And they're interested, but like I said, there's a question around financial viability. How do you market? How do you sell tickets? what differentiates what I'm doing from what you might find at a local yoga studio. And if you've been with me, if you've been at one of my experiences, you know what differentiates that. But then sometimes that can be hard to articulate in words. So I'm learning. I am super stoked this weekend to be headed back to Omaha Steelhouse. Last year in Omaha, did 2 offerings of the reset, and I'm going to do that again this year. And I have to say, like, my biggest crowd of last year was in Omaha, Nebraska. Who would have known? But it was so exciting and so life-giving, and so I've been invited to come back here just a year later, and I'm stoked. I'm super stoked this weekend. So if you're in or around Omaha, um, or you know someone who is, send them to the reset at the Steelhouse. And also, I'm going to be offering a community improvisational singing gathering. It's called I'll Sing Omaha, and I'm going to be doing that the day after my performances, which is really my intention as I go forward, as I travel and perform, is to show up in multiple ways and just see what kind of folks vibe with what I'm doing. And then from there, there's so much about this year that is just so unknown. As I said to you a couple episodes ago, if I'm really honest with you, I don't have a lot of gigs booked. Like I said, there's some challenges around buyer education and just learning how to make this thing viable. And so I'm just trusting the universe to continue to help me understand more clearly how it is that I can show up and be of service with what I'm doing and offering and gather momentum in that way. Which I think might lead me well into the topic that I'd like to, I don't know, unpack with you today. If you've been listening to me for a while, one of the themes that you might have noticed within what I share is the common points of resistance that I see within others and within myself when it comes to creative expression, or even really approaching the possibility of being a creative and free person. As a quick side note, I wanted to say that when I first started my podcast, it was called The Sound of You, which I still think is a is a really cute title because it was specifically about singing and the voice. But in that first season, I did a bunch of interviews with folks, and one of the people that I interviewed was a teacher of mine, a woman named Rhiannon, who was a contemporary and a colleague, is a contemporary and a colleague of Bobby McFerrin, and has been an important teacher for me in the realm of improvisational singing. And I don't know why this one phrase has taken up residence in my head that she said, but I think about it all the time. She was reflecting back to me about a time in her younger years when she was in San Francisco and she was participating in experimental theater, jazz, improvisation. And she talked about the community that she was a part of then, and she reflected that they were all just trying to get free. I can hear it as clear as day. She said, we were all just trying to get free. And that has forever stuck with me because A, it just speaks to my experience as a human, and I suspect it speaks to yours. And I think that's at the heart of what it is that I'm trying to communicate with this podcast. I'm doing so a lot through the lens, the verbiage of creativity or self-expression. But I think of those as channels or pathways to getting free. Honestly, I feel, even as I'm saying this to you, a sort of visceral response to that intention and that word. What must it feel like to be free? So many of us are so weighed down by the confines of our experience and the stories that we've been given. So many of us are mired in false narratives and choices that seem to cling to us from the past. And at the heart of my desire in sharing my own experience about prioritizing creativity, personal authentic expression, the voice, prioritizing healing, a spiritual practice, making, at the heart of all of that is that it is part of the human desire to just be free, to not be constrained by what others might think, or to feel held back by unreliable sources. Which takes me back to what it is that I wanted to talk to you about today. Oftentimes, when I'm working with a client, particularly in the coaching space, there are a number of factors that they'll bring up that are reasons that they don't feel that they can pursue their authentic voice, their creative expression. And I've shared with you many of those before. The easiest ones are typically money. That's a big one that comes up first. It doesn't make financial sense. Another one is age. It's too late. I'm too old. This looks silly. A huge one is time. I don't have the time for it. It doesn't align with my current schedule, my life, my obligations. But another one that comes up so often, and I just had this conversation the other day, and I really related to it, which is why I wanted to share it with you. But this, in some ways, maybe this idea serves as a receptacle for all of those other things: time, money, resources. People will say that they aren't willing or they don't feel able to pursue their creative expression because it seems selfish. That word, selfish. I hear that word so often. It always kind of comes down to that. Like, even when you try to unpack, the financial realities or the resource realities of one's life, even if you can kind of get past that, there often is this other hump of, isn't it just sort of self-serving or a selfish act? Now, you might be listening to this and already feel evolved past that. And if so, good for you. Because I want to speak a lot about this word selfishness today, but maybe that's not a part of your personal narrative. But I just ask you to hang out for a bit because I think that there's some usefulness in talking about this in general as it relates to our lives. But for some of you, maybe just me saying that word, it feels really true in terms of the stories that you have for yourself. Your fear of doing something that would just be self-serving. And that feels especially complicated in light of the obligations you have to, let's say, family members, to your job, the obligations we have to a society and a culture that feels like it is a mess. I was watching the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee ceremony concert the other night, and the final inductee of the evening was Cyndi Lauper. And man, I just admire her. I think she's so cool. She's, first of all, she sings amazing at the age that she is. She still dresses in a classic Cyndi Lauper way, and she's such a self-deprecating, humorous, free, creative individual. But in her speech, which was totally appropriately rambling and not even totally sensical, which I just loved, she said that she is, in her heart of hearts, still a young girl who believes that rock and roll can change the world. And I was thinking to myself as she said that in our contemporary culture and society, that maybe that statement feels more radical than ever. Because we live in a culture and a society that doesn't prioritize creative expression as having inherent meaning and worth in and of itself, unless it yields financial gain or fame or social media followers or you name it. But I think it's important that we go back in this conversation to consider the origin of artistic creative expression. I Many of you know I have a what I call an immersive keynote experience called Voxus, where I bring improvisational singing into corporate environments. And the talk portion of that is very much about the power of collective singing and the voice and bringing together many voices. But one of the portions of that talk that I like to share is about why people ever sang together to begin with. And it is my belief that the origin of anyone singing ever comes back to self expression, the pure desire to create and express. And there is some satisfaction to be found in just doing that within oneself. But there's this next thing that happens, which is why I believe that people historically have come and sang together, in that there is a recognition in the moment of shared ideas, a shared experience. So when one sings, when one expresses themselves, there's obviously, if they're using words, they're the words that they express, whether that be about love or a rite of passage or a religious devotional affiliation or what have you, that then draws others to join in because they relate, they connect, they find themselves shared in that experience. But it requires that initial courage of the first person to share of themselves to begin with, to actually use their voice. And again, like, why would one do that? Why would one create? Well, not to jump to the punchline too fast, but I think it's because, like Cyndi Lauper, we believe that our voice, we believe that our creativity, we believe that our self expression has the potential of changing the world. And I think we're right. There's a good chance that you do too, but you also are probably like me in that you often get conditioned by the culture to think, yeah, that's a nice idea. That's sort of a grand vision, but what does that mean on the daily? I mean, what does it mean on the daily if you like what good are you if you just sat in your room and you sang, or you just sat in the studio and did ceramics all day, or you were just sewing, or you were just writing that theater piece? Like, did you really contribute to the good of the world? Did you really contribute? And this is where self-doubt starts to creep in and questions around selfishness. I'm going to say something quite bold here, and I think that there's a lot of room to tease this out and a lot of nuance, but I'm going to say it. Um, I don't believe in selfishness. I believe in uh, selfish behaviors, but I think that at the heart of selfishness is typically fear. And that I don't think that humans are inherently selfish. I believe that they have an inherent desire to find connection. But when one participates in behaviors that might seem selfish, they're simply protecting themselves against whatever fearful story has become the dominant narrative in their lives. And then those stories become perpetuated and they permeate other areas. And we start to turn them into a blanket statement about how it is that someone might be as a human. And I think that this narrative around selfishness when it comes to prioritizing creativity, or your creative expression, or just the things that make you happy in the world, I think that it's a product of the patriarchy. I think it's a product of capitalism. I honestly think it's a product of trying to be kept down by the man. And I say that with a giggle, but I kind of mean it seriously, because when one truly becomes aligned with themselves, when one really stops long enough to listen and participate, to that inner knowing, that inner wisdom, that inner desire to express oneself, the ideas and the messages that might come forth, they'll likely be quite radical. They'll likely be antithetical to what the culture says is acceptable or the norm. And so it's better to tell people that if you spend too much time in a space of creativity, if you spend too much time playing the guitar, if you spend too much time yada, 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 you name it, then you are acting selfishly and you're not contributing positively to society. And I think that's bullshit. It's total, total bullshit. The people that I know that prioritize their own creative expression, the people I know that have practices around prioritizing creativity, expression, their own well-being, those are the happiest people I know. And those are ultimately the people that I believe have the capacity to be in best service to others. The people who are suppressing those creative urges, the people who are diminishing their um, desire to be in relationship with themselves in that way, the people who don't have the capacity to create the space that they need, those are the people that end up projecting upon others their resentment, their frustrations, their fear, their inhibitions. And those people, I think, ultimately find themselves in a position of causing potentially harm and damage in a way that the others just wouldn't. It wouldn't be on their radar to do. Early on in my meditation life, I learned a meditation called loving kindness meditation, which you might be familiar with. It's also referred to as metta, M-E-T-T-A. If you're not familiar with it, I would totally recommend checking it out. It's a really powerful practice. But I'm going to give you a little Buddhist lesson here and hopefully loop it back around to what it is that I'm saying with regards to selfishness and creativity. So the story around metta, the origin of metta, is that there were these monks, these Buddhist monks, that were instructed by the Buddha to go into the woods, go into the forest and meditate. And when they did, there was a cacophony of ghosts and spirits that emerged from the forest that made them quite fearful. And they came running back to the Buddha and they said, it's scary in there. That's a very fearful experience. We don't feel safe. And so it was in light of that that the Buddha offered metta as an antidote to fear. And the practice is simply this: it's the act of well-wishing. Specifically, the repeatable phrases that are often given are, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, and may I live with ease. And then the practice moves from oneself, begins with oneself. May I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, and may I live with ease. And it moves on to next what's called the benefactor, someone you love. May that person be safe, may they be happy, and may they be healthy, and they may live with ease. And then onto a neutral person, someone that you don't know that well, maybe like a barista at a coffee shop or someone you pass on the street. May they be safe, happy, healthy, and live with ease. And then from there we move to an enemy, someone who has potentially done you wrong or caused you harm in the past. May they be safe, may they be happy, may they be healthy, and may they live with ease. And then finally, may all living beings. The Buddha said that this practice was an antidote to fear. And when I first learned this practice, it was so radical for me in that it started with me. That the Buddha instructed that the first recipient of metta, or loving kindness, or what's also referred to as unconditional friendliness to oneself, the first recipient is oneself. That I and actually, the more you learn about metta, some people dedicate years at a time only practicing portions of the practice. So, for instance, you might spend even just a year only doing the practice toward yourself and then adding on the others as time went on. But this was so counter to the narrative I was given for so much of my life, where I was taught to rely upon sources potentially outside of myself for my own well being. And the mere notion of beginning with oneself was a selfish act. I don't know that anyone even said that to me explicitly, but it was really what I learned. That if you were spending too much time focusing upon yourself, that you were engaging selfishness. You were acting selfishly. And so when I first started to use this practice, this metta practice, this loving kindness practice, and I sat with myself and I said, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease, I realized that there was a care and a nurturing that only I could offer me. It felt so loving and it felt so life-giving. And the beautiful part of the practice is that once I've offered it to myself, my well becomes deeper. What it is that I'm able to offer others expands. And the other beautiful part about the practice is the first person that I expand this loving kindness to is someone who's already demonstrated it toward me. Someone who's already given of themselves. So it's not just like, you know, put my mask on and then put the mask on other people who I don't know. It's like you start closest to you. And in so doing that, your well becomes even deeper. Your capacity becomes greater. Everything sort of expands. Your sense of loving kindness, your sense of unconditional friendliness toward yourself, it speaks to the human condition and the desire of all human beings to experience general well-being. And so as you practice, you can go further and further out, and eventually you find your way to your enemy. And it's important to know that in relationship to that, that you don't necessarily have to rekindle a relationship with that person or be close to them, but you can acknowledge their general desire for well-being. So I share that with you as a reflection of how creative expression can, maybe, might, does work as well. See, it's part of my belief system that all human beings are creative. In fact, I think it's our highest calling as human beings. And again, I want to reiterate that when I hear myself say creative or creativity, I'm using that, and it sounds trite. It's just the best word that I have. But what I'm really talking about is your desire to express yourself, to make, to create, to be seen, to be heard, to sing, to dance, to move, to paint, to sculpt, to write, to whatever. That human urge to be in the world, to be embodied, to be an embodied presence in the world. We're just going to throw all that under creativity. But when I come back to this basic fundamental human desire, and I've never met a person, I met a lot of people who think they aren't creative, but I've never met a person that I don't believe has some sense within themselves that it would just feel good to be seen, to be heard, to be known. But it's my belief that in order to do so, one has to create. I'm not saying it all has to be art. It can be a business. It could be a lot of different things. But one has to create, and that's what we do in this lifetime. We create. It could be a child, very literally. But we as humans, we come to this experience. We struggle, we suffer, but we also thrive, especially in the midst of creativity and connection. And so when we recognize that desire within ourselves, if we don't ignore it, if we don't push it by the wayside, if we don't suppress it, if we don't diminish its worth and its value, we then recognize that it exists within all human beings, and we therefore share our connectivity with all human beings. We start to see within them a light of being that desires so deeply to shine bright enough to illuminate not only themselves, but others around them. So, how could that possibly be selfish? What aspects of that are selfish? Now, I've been in this conversation enough times to know that you will have some question within you saying, well, what about this? Or what about this? And I'm not suggesting here that we do people wrong. I'm not suggesting here that we avoid obligations. I'm not suggesting that you don't pay your bills. I'm not saying any of that. But I'm asking you to consider what might it be to prioritize personal creativity and expression in a way that feels boundaried and in a way that feels energetically unique to how you might have operated in the past. I'm not saying just cram this in the corner. I'm saying prioritize. What if you really carved out space in your life for play, curiosity, creativity, making, doing? And what if when that narrative came up around selfishness, because it'll probably come up. In fact, I would even venture to say that other people might say it to you. I was in conversation with a coaching client the other day who has made some real changes in their life. And they were saying that people who were in relationship with them, the changes being setting new boundaries, not allowing themselves to be in harmful conversations, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the people within which their relationship, with which they're in relationship with, said to them, you only want to do things on your terms now. And I told them that that's actually a really important response to setting new boundaries in relationship, because what they're really saying is we're not doing things on my terms or the terms in which I thought we were going to do them in the past. And so I offered this client the possibility of saying, that's not true, but if you believe it to be true, where can you meet me in where I am? Because this person also reflected that how it was that they were showing up was giving them life. It was making them feel more like themselves, more aligned, more authentic, more true, more stable in those other relationships. The ways in which they had engaged with other relationships in the past had been so destabilizing. So if I'm showing up to this situation and you're going, you're different, something's different here, and I don't know if I like it, that might be a really good thing. It might be a necessary thing in terms of creating change in your life. People always want difference. As we look at the new year, they go, I'm going to work out, I'm going to eat differently, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. But the problem is that actual difference, actual change is entirely disruptive. It will mess someone's schedule up. It will require a shift of funds. It will mean for systems to feel like they're out of sync. And that's where the counter narrative starts to come in around, you're being selfish. You're choosing yourself over me. And sometimes that's simply a reaction to actual change. It's a reaction to the disruption. And to which I would say, if you hear that at the beginning, good. Take it in, be compassionate, be curious about someone else's experience in the change that you're creating, but give it time, give it space, and consider how you feel in and of yourself. How do you feel being yourself in the midst of demonstrating this change? You might feel a little bit different because you're making different choices. But do they feel true? Do they feel honest? Because if they do, I promise that in so doing, you will expand your capacity to actually be of healthy service to others. You will not then project your insecurities, your fears upon them, but you will recognize the shared parts of you that want to be happy, healthy, live with ease. You will recognize the creative urge that lives in all of us that wants desperately to just get free, to flourish, to feel like you're living a life of creative expression. To me, that's a life well lived. A life that everything around me reflects my unique point of view. No one will do this like you. Not now, not ever again. No one will say the things that you say. No one will make the things that you make. No one will create the things that you create. And so you owe it to the world to prioritize those things because it's a part of positive evolution. It's a part of how it is that we move forward as a species. We don't move forward by you suppressing that which brings you joy. At best, we stay static. At worst, we move back. We live in a time and an era which I think is especially complicated in that we have collectively, on a planetary level, access and resources in ways that we haven't before. You know, we live in a globalized world, interconnected. And that's not to say that there aren't folks that are certainly outside of the means in that regard. I know that. And I don't mean to diminish their experience as well. But I do know that as a planet, there are a lot more people with a lot more access than there ever has been in human history. But with that access also comes the challenges of experiencing so much that's new. I think about the sitting in the midst of the emergence of AI. I mean, with it comes the promise of human progress. And yet also there's an existential threat that comes with that. And we are sitting in the midst of that right now. We don't know what to do with it because we've not experienced it before. What does it mean? Everyone has a projected idea and yet nobody knows. So it's so complicated in that regard to be alive. But in light of that, I believe that now more than ever, it is important for us to come back to ourselves, to become in deep relationship with ourselves, to continue to evolve the human condition, the human experience, our humanity, as a means of fostering deeper connection, as a means of growing our individual and creative lights, so as to confront the challenges of contemporary society in new and innovative ways. We need to be in deep relationship with ourselves so that we can be in deep relationship with each other and we can face this together. Selfish behaviors are always fearful behaviors. Courageous behaviors are always selfless. Courageous behaviors are ego-less. Selfish behaviors are merely functions of the ego to preserve itself. But when it comes to creativity, one must dissolve the ego in order to get free. And there's a good chance you know those moments where it goes away, where you're in the flow, where you're doing the thing and time passes and you're just like, whoa, I don't even know what just flowed through me or how that happened. And you find yourself experiencing yourself, your capital S self, in a truly unique way. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a unique way. And that inevitably means that you'll move about the world differently. Potentially with more kindness, with more care, with more compassion, with more love. Creative engagement, creative expression is a spiritual practice. It is an act of human evolution. It is a radical act. Rock and roll can change the world. Rock and roll has changed the world. Music, art, painting, dancing, community will change the world. And it's in our hands right now to prioritize that. You can't wait. You have to go. You have to do the thing. You have to experiment. You have to play. You have to allow yourself to fail. And when you hear that voice, that shameful voice of selfishness, know deep in your bones that that is simply the voice of fear. And now it is time for you to claim your courage. And when it comes from others, know that that has two potential components. One is a projection that is threatened by your courageous choice to prioritize yourself, but also because you, in so doing, are disrupting old systems. You're disrupting old ways of being. You're not allowing people to treat you how they used to. You're not allowing for yourself to be a victim in the ways in which you might have been in the past. So what do you think? Are you willing to take that creative, courageous nudge and go with it? Are you willing to act quote unquote selfishly in the name of being in greater service to all human beings? That's really at the heart of what it is that I believe that this is about. It's about creativity as an act of service to the universe, to the planet, to humans, to all living beings. It is, in my estimation, one of the greatest acts of service that we can offer. So I hope this might inspire you. I hope that you might hear this, view this as a permission slip, and I hope that you might, take some big steps here. All right, my friends, don't forget, I'd love to hear from you, and we'll be back next time with some more. All right, until then, peace.